Some stories are the tales of triumph, while others are tales of tragedy. This one is both. I recently bought a Mac Mini G4 off eBay. This is a computer I wanted for a very long time, as it is a stunningly good design. That is if you don't consider the innards, as this was a budget computer from 2005. I'm not going to spend too much time waxing poetic on this because I'm pretty sure all my audience is pretty familiar with this computer. It received mostly a lukewarm reception as the G4 was very long in tooth. This was not a computer you bought because of the exciting performance and a cool form factor. It was Apple's cheapest entry into the Macintosh ecosystem. It's the original compact mini PC, or at least the original mainstream one, as Shell PC probably has that as the title as they were around in the early 2000s. Even today, among more modern mini PCs, this is still an impressive form factor. That said, at the point of its introduction, its price was emphasized more than its size.
This is the most affordable Mac ever. As a matter of fact, it's the cheapest computer Apple's ever offered.
It's the all-important first step into what is now probably Apple's flagship desktop computer. What makes the Mac Mini great for a retro computer enthusiast is its size and its ability to run modified Mac OS 9, aka Mac OS Classic, natively. Its mod specs of a 1.24 GHz G4, a ATI Radeon 9200 with only 32 MB of VRAM, and up to a 1 GB of RAM might not seem ideal for OS 10, but that's positively a rocket ship when it comes to OS 9. I have a Power Mac G4 that can boot OS 9, but I ended up hacking, and I do mean literally, a ATI Radeon 9600 Pro into it. This upgrade eliminates any hopes of native OS 9 acceleration. Rather than swapping graphics cards, I figured a Mac Mini makes for the smallest and most power efficient OS 9 computer. The Radeon 9200 has OS 9 drivers, and while it's not the fastest GPU in OS 9, it's on the upper end of them. The maximum of 1 GB of RAM verges on overkill, and plus it can even support larger volumes than 128 GB or 137. I can never remember which it is. And lastly, that 1.25 GHz G4 was underwhelming in 2005, but is nearly at the top of OS 9 compatible CPUs. That is, if you're willing to deal with the workarounds of using Mac OS 9 libs and installing the hack drivers. The G4's 85 watts is pretty impressive when you consider this 2010 Mac Mini or this Geekom 2022 PC are both 85 watts. I received my Mac Mini G4 from an eBay seller, and it wasn't quite what I expected. I thought I bought a Mac Mini G4 with 512 MB of RAM and a 40 GB hard drive that was confirmed working, but instead I received a computer that wouldn't even chime when powered on. I cracked it open, the first time opening a Mac Mini G4, to find that it was missing the hard drive and it had a 1 GB DIMM. Very fortunately for me, I had already planned that I was going to probably upgrade this to a SSD at some point in the future, so I had ordered a SATA to 44-pin ATA adapter. I pulled out my super junky Kingston SSD, which has sadly been in too many of my videos at this point. Rather than burning a disk to install the OS, I just jammed this thing into my Power Mac G4 and cloned the Tiger install off it using Carbon Copy Cloner. Then I installed the drive in the Mac Mini, and I have to say this is a pretty tight fit. Unsurprisingly, the Mac Mini still wasn't chiming, and I wasn't sure what to do next, so I asked online. And I'm taking the super bold stance that I'm not afraid to admit that. I was told to replace the PRAM battery, and fortunately for me, the Mac Mini uses the same battery as a AirTag. So I yanked the battery and did the PRAM reset, and I was able to get a chime. And that's the sound of progress, but I still wasn't able to get a picture. My setup is a bit unusual as I use a 15-foot DVI cable to HDMI and a wireless keyboard and mouse on a dongle, and most of the time I'm plugging this into a HDMI capture device. I suspected it was the cable or display to blame, so I took it to my office, which is loaded with shitty DVI displays, and confirmed that my Mac Mini was indeed booting. If you're one of my coworkers watching this video, first off, I'm surprised, and secondly, you know those monitors aren't very good, right? With that confirmed, I ordered a shorter DVI to HDMI cable and paid $2.99 to get the same day delivery, something I've never done before. I found out the Mac Mini G4 isn't as forgiving as my Power Mac G4 despite having the same video chipset. It was able to directly output video to my BenQ display, but for some reason not to my Sony X800 43-inch display, or either of my HDMI to USB capture cards. For whatever reason, my very expensive BenQ monitor just will not display any of the packet info about what kind of signal it's receiving, so who knows what this is outputting. Still, I was able to get 1080p out of my Mac Mini, which was pretty exciting troubleshooting as my Mac Mini went from non-functional to functional, but I still didn't have a clean way to capture the video output. The short of it is I have a Yamaha home theater receiver that allows me to use 55-pound floor-standing speakers as computer speakers, and it changes the input on my Sony TV so I can connect my MacBooks with a single Thunderbolt cable to my 2 displays and my receiver. I wanted to see if I could get video out from my Mac Mini over the receiver, directly to the Sony TV, to the HDMI capture devices, and so on. My Mac Mini only seemed to work with the BenQ monitor and nothing else, which wasn't ideal, but I figured, I can live with that. Only later searching through forums did I learn that the Mac Mini has a low pixel clock timing at 135 MHz. My problems with my Sony TV and my capture devices were probably related to the pixel clock timing. They probably wanted 140 some megahertz for 1080p. Perhaps if I found a way to force 720p, it may have worked. I had a functioning Mac Mini G4 running Tiger despite my inability to capture clean video. That is, until my Mac Mini froze. I'm not a retro computing expert, but I feel somewhat confident in my abilities. I rebooted my Mac Mini and it went to a question mark. I rebooted again, performed a PRAM reset, and the same issue. I tried option booting and I saw nothing there too. I didn't really think much of it, so I yanked out my SSD and jammed it into my Power Mac G4. The drive seemed fine, so I reformatted it for good measure and decided to clone OS X and this time OS 9 as well. When I went back to my Mac Mini, nothing had changed, so I wondered if I had gotten too cute trying to install 2 OSs, so I formatted the drive to be a single partition. I got the question mark again. After multiple boot failures, I went back to my trusty Power Mac G4 and made doubly sure that it had a Apple Master boot record and cloned Tiger again. Nope, it refused the boot. I ripped it apart for a third time, and this time the Mac Mini regressed. It'd power up for a second and power back down. The Mac Mini uses a funky daughter board design that combines the ATA for the optical drive, hard drive, a fan, a speaker, and also the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi antennas. This is a classic case study in Apple over-engineering. Another PC maker would have just run the ATA cable, the wires for the speaker and fan, and called it a day. SATA to ATA adapters can be finicky. I wasn't gung-ho about installing an SSD on the Mac Mini as I had first-hand experience on my Power Mac G4. The first adapter I bought didn't work at all, so I just went with expensive StarTech adapters. But I didn't see a high-end 44-pin option that worked with my Mac Mini, so I bought a cheap one. Well, the only thing I can figure is I damaged the daughter board when I was trying to force in the SSD and force it back out. Now the computer won't even power up with the SSD removed, so if anyone has tips, I'd love to hear them. I don't see any visible damage, so for now, my Mac Mini seems like it's toast. And that's how I wasted about $60. Okay, it's late in the editing process and I realized that I didn't address something that inevitably people are going to ask me about, and that is using the eBay return policy, which I did. I actually reached out to the seller and they said that they would take 50% off, because once I realized I was missing the screws, missing the hard drive, and a different amount of RAM, I figured they sent me the wrong unit. So at that point, that was very early in the stage of this video. I just powered it on the first time because I got the power supply and it wasn't chiming. So I decided to say yes to it. Obviously, this is not the video I wanted to make, and after consulting with some friends in the retro community, they said it's important to show the failures, and boy did I ever fail, so this is my video. I wish I had a strong conclusion, and if you think you know what's going on with my Mac Mini, please let me know in the comments, because obviously I don't. That is surprising that my Mac Mini doesn't work, but not entirely. So thanks to anyone who watched to the end. You guys are great, and especially thanks to my Patreons. You are what makes these kind of failures possible.